He thought he was here to learn a lesson, until she taught him one that wasn't in the books. He had walked past the building dozens of times before, never thinking he'd set foot inside. Tonight was different, an evening class on something he'd always been curious about but never pursued. The hall was quiet, lit by soft, warm lights that made the old wooden desks glow with a faint golden hue. He ran a hand over the polished surface, feeling the cool wood beneath his fingers, and tried to steady the slight flutter in his chest. Then she entered. The teacher was not what he had expected. She carried herself with a calm assurance, her posture relaxed yet commanding attention in the softest way. Her hair, dark with streaks of silver, framed her face elegantly, falling just past her shoulders. When she smiled, it was warm but measured, as if she understood everything and yet shared nothing too quickly. He noticed her eyes first, keen, observant, almost piercing in their quiet way. They scanned the room briefly before settling on him with a hint of curiosity. He felt a sudden tug of awareness in his chest. That fleeting gaze made him self-conscious, yet strangely invited him in. It was unsettling and exciting all at once. He shifted slightly, adjusting his notebook, hoping she wouldn't notice his fumbling. But she did. She had a way of noticing things, not in a judgmental sense, but with the soft precision of someone who truly paid attention. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had a melodic warmth that immediately put him at ease. She welcomed the students with a gentle humor, a tone that could make anyone feel like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. He felt drawn to her, not just by her presence, but by the subtle confidence that radiated from her in every gesture. The way she moved through the classroom, adjusting chairs and offering quiet guidance, was effortless yet intimate. Every step, every hand movement seemed deliberate but natural. He caught himself watching her hands as she brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, or as she reached down to adjust a book on a desk. His heartbeat quickened at the smallest of touches, even the imagined sensation of her fingers brushing his hand as she helped another student sparked something inside him. He chastised himself silently. She's my teacher. She's older. This isn't appropriate. But the thought of turning away felt impossible. As the lesson began, he found himself absorbing not just the material, but her mannerisms, her subtle smiles, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed quietly at a student's awkward comment. It was as if he were learning more from her presence than the subject itself. His mind lingered on the texture of her voice, the soft cadence that carried authority without ever demanding it. By the end of the evening, he realized he had been holding his breath without noticing. As he left the classroom, he glanced back, hoping for one more smile, one more fleeting connection. And she gave it, a quiet, almost imperceptible nod, accompanied by that warm, lingering gaze. He stepped into the night, heart thumping, mind spinning. He knew, somewhere deep inside, that this class, and this teacher, would change him in ways he couldn't yet understand. The first lesson had already begun, and it wasn't in the books. The next class began with a sense of anticipation that neither of them openly acknowledged. He arrived early, sitting at a corner desk, nervously arranging his notes as he tried to focus on the subject. But his attention kept drifting, drawn back to the woman at the front of the room. She moved with effortless grace, placing books on the desk, adjusting the projector, her fingers brushing against the edge of the materials in a way that seemed almost deliberate yet natural. Today's lesson was hands-on, a technique that required guidance and demonstration. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest as she approached him, a subtle awareness that this interaction would be different from anything he had experienced. "Here," she said softly, kneeling slightly to bring herself to his level, "try holding it like this." Her hand brushed his as she adjusted his grip, and the contact sent an unexpected shiver through him. It was fleeting, polite, and professional, yet it carried a warmth that lingered far longer than the touch itself. He quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the technique, but he couldn't ignore the sensation of her presence so close to him, the faint scent of her perfume, warm and comforting, mingling with the quiet hum of the classroom lights. The brush of her sleeve against his arm, the soft vibration of her voice as she explained, made him acutely aware of every movement. Even her breathing seemed synchronized with his own, a gentle rhythm he felt in his chest more than he heard. Her smile, when she noticed his nervousness, was patient and slightly teasing, as though she understood more about him than he did about himself. He wanted to speak, to say something witty or clever, but his words faltered under the weight of her gaze. She leaned just a little closer to show him again, her hand guiding his, fingers brushing with careful precision. Each accidental touch felt like a spark, igniting curiosity and tension that neither of them acknowledged aloud. Despite his growing awareness of the attraction, he focused on learning. He had never felt this way in a classroom before. Every movement, every glance, every quiet word carried a weight of emotion he couldn't name. He noticed the way she paused, observing him as if weighing not just his skill but his sincerity, his openness to the moment. Her presence seemed to stretch the boundaries of the ordinary lesson, making the room warmer, quieter, more intimate. By the end of the session, the hands-on exercise was finished, but the lingering connection remained. She gave a subtle nod and a brief, knowing smile as he packed his materials, and he realized that for the first time, he was leaving a classroom not just with knowledge, but with something far more compelling, a fascination with her, the teacher who seemed to be teaching lessons he hadn't even realized he needed. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he felt the residual warmth of her proximity, the lingering spark of their first real interaction. Something unspoken had passed between them, an invisible thread, delicate yet undeniable, pulling him back toward her with every thought. This first lesson had already reached beyond the subject, planting the beginnings of curiosity, admiration, and a quiet, growing tension that neither of them could ignore. He didn't expect to see her outside the classroom, and yet, there she was, sitting quietly in the corner of a small cafe near the campus. The evening sun filtered through the large windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the room, illuminating the subtle highlights in her hair. She seemed almost ethereal in that light, calm and composed as she sipped her tea. He hesitated at the entrance, unsure if he should approach. But before he could decide, her eyes met his, and that small, knowing smile appeared, the same one that had lingered in the classroom, the one that made him feel simultaneously seen and exposed. She gestured subtly to the empty seat across from her. "Join me," she said softly. Her voice was familiar, yet different outside the structured environment of the classroom, slightly warmer, more personal, inviting him into her space. Sitting across from her, he noticed the way her hands moved, graceful, deliberate, as she adjusted her cup or tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. There was a quiet confidence in her presence, but beneath it, he sensed a subtle vulnerability. When she began to speak about a past experience, a moment of regret, a choice she had made that changed her path, her voice wavered just slightly. He leaned in, compelled to listen, feeling the weight of her honesty. The cafe smelled of roasted coffee and freshly baked pastries, but he hardly noticed. All of his attention was on her, the cadence of her speech, the warmth of her tone, the way her eyes held a softness that contrasted with her usual composed demeanor. He found himself mirroring her posture, leaning forward slightly, eager to be closer, to be fully present for her. At one point, their hands brushed accidentally as he reached for his cup. The contact was brief but electrifying. He felt a jolt of awareness, a heat spreading across his chest. He quickly withdrew his hand, embarrassed, but she didn't seem perturbed. Instead, she gave him a small, amused smile, as if silently acknowledging the moment without making it awkward. That tiny exchange, so simple, so fleeting, carried a depth of connection he hadn't expected. As they talked, laughter occasionally punctuated the conversation, soft and genuine. He noticed the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes when she laughed, the way her shoulders relaxed when she felt comfortable. These small details made him see her differently, not just as a teacher, but as a woman with layers of experience, warmth, and complexity. He wanted to ask more, to reach for her hand or touch her shoulder in reassurance, but he hesitated, aware of the delicate line between propriety and intimacy. Yet, the tension lingered in the pauses, in the shared glances, in the moments when words weren't necessary. It was as if the world outside the cafe faded, leaving only the two of them in a suspended, delicate moment of trust and closeness. By the time they parted, he felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and longing. He had glimpsed a side of her that few people might ever see, a vulnerability wrapped in quiet strength. And though they returned to their separate routines, the memory of that golden afternoon lingered, a silent thread connecting them, promising that this story, their story, was only beginning to unfold. The classroom felt different that evening. He noticed it the moment he stepped in, the way the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long, soft shadows across the desks, making the familiar room feel almost intimate. She was already there, moving gracefully between rows, checking assignments and offering quiet guidance to students. Her presence seemed to fill the space, yet she radiated a calm control that drew his attention immediately. Today's lesson required close collaboration, and he was paired with her to demonstrate a technique for the class. He felt the familiar flutter in his chest, the same one he'd felt the first day, but stronger, more insistent. As he moved closer to follow her instructions, their hands brushed, just slightly, when she reached to adjust the position of a book. It was a tiny contact, almost accidental, yet it sparked an awareness that he could not ignore. He tried to focus on the demonstration, but his mind betrayed him, lingering on her presence, the way her hair fell around her shoulders, the subtle tilt of her head as she watched him, the warmth of her proximity. Every subtle movement seemed amplified, the quiet click of her shoes on the floor, the soft brush of her sleeve against his arm, the measured cadence of her voice as she explained the steps. He realized he was aware not just of her instructions, but of the way she made him feel alert, nervous, and yet oddly at ease all at once. She paused mid-motion, fixing him with a look that was both assessing and something deeper, something he could not yet name. Her eyes held a question, a silent acknowledgement of the tension between them, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink. He felt his pulse quicken, the air heavier, warmer, as if charged with unspoken words. He looked down, embarrassed, but aware that her gaze lingered, patient yet deliberate. The physical closeness, proximity that would have been mundane with anyone else, felt electric. Her hand briefly rested on his shoulder to guide him, a gentle touch that conveyed support but stirred something entirely different within him. The brush of skin, the subtle warmth of her body nearby, and the faint, familiar scent of her perfume created a sensory mix that made concentration almost impossible. He chastised himself for noticing, for letting the moment affect him, yet he could not stop the awareness of her presence. Despite the tension, she remained professional, never overstepping, never making him uncomfortable, but the subtle glances, the small pauses, the unspoken understanding between them suggested an invisible thread connecting them. It was a delicate dance of propriety and desire, a silent acknowledgement that their connection went beyond the classroom. As the lesson ended and the students began to file out, neither of them spoke about the moment, yet the energy lingered. He packed his notebook slowly, aware of every movement, acutely conscious of the way she looked at him, an enigmatic mixture of curiosity and quiet restraint. The tension had intensified, unspoken but undeniable, and he realized that each encounter was pulling him closer to a feeling he wasn't ready to define, yet could no longer deny. Walking out of the classroom, he felt a strange exhilaration, tempered by hesitation. Something had shifted, not in words, but in the space between them. The lesson had gone beyond technique or subject matter. This time, the attraction was tangible, subtle, and forbidden, and he knew that navigating it would require more than caution, it would require an honesty neither of them had dared to voice. The classroom was empty, the day's final lesson finished, and the quiet hum of the lights was the only sound as he lingered near the doorway. He had meant to leave, to slip into the cool evening air and pretend the tension of the day wasn't simmering under his skin. But something held him back, an unspoken pull that seemed to grow stronger with every glance toward the front of the room. She was still there, moving slowly, gathering her materials with a calm precision that belied the gentle vulnerability he sensed now. Perhaps she had stayed for the same reason he had, to linger a little longer in the quiet after the noise of the lesson. He stepped closer, clearing his throat softly. "Do you need any help?" His voice sounded steadier than he felt. She looked up, and for a moment, her composed expression faltered just slightly, revealing the flicker of warmth and quiet relief beneath her calm exterior. "I could use a hand," she said softly, and there was an ease in her tone that made him step forward without hesitation. They moved together around the desks, the soft scrape of chairs and rustle of papers filling the space between them. When she handed him a stack of books, their hands brushed again, slightly longer this time. He didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he noticed the warmth of her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse under his fingertips, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the quiet of the room. For a heartbeat, the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them suspended in that delicate, charged space. She paused mid-step and looked at him, her eyes searching, unguarded. There was a hesitation there that mirrored his own, a silent question hanging in the air. The soft glow of the late afternoon light framed her face, highlighting the faint crinkles around her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips. He wanted to speak, to break the quiet, but words seemed inadequate. Finally, she spoke first, her voice low and tentative. "I've noticed you more than I probably should." His heart skipped. He felt a mix of relief and nervousness, knowing she had acknowledged the connection he had been trying to name in his own mind. I feel the same," he admitted quietly, almost in a whisper, afraid of shattering the fragile intimacy of the moment. They shared a long silence, the weight of honesty settling between them. Neither moved immediately, neither needed to. The quiet was comforting, a shared acknowledgement that what they felt was real, even if complicated. Her hand brushed against his arm, a small, lingering contact that spoke of trust, warmth, and a tentative closeness. As the light shifted, casting long shadows across the room, he realized that this moment, fleeting, fragile, perfect, was the first time they had truly allowed themselves to be seen. Vulnerability had transformed the tension into something tangible, something meaningful. The attraction was no longer a subtle undercurrent, it was an unspoken truth between them, acknowledged without urgency or expectation. Finally, she gave him a small, almost shy smile, a gesture of quiet affirmation. He returned it, feeling a strange calm settle over him. They had crossed an invisible line, not into romance fully, not into certainty, but into a space where emotional honesty created intimacy. The evening faded into golden light, leaving them connected in a way that promised the slow, unfolding journey of feelings that neither could ignore. The seminar room was quieter than usual that evening, the chatter of other attendees fading into soft background noise. He and she had arrived together, under the pretext of a class-related project, but the subtle tension between them lingered in every shared glance. The dim lighting made the space feel smaller, more intimate, as if the rest of the world had receded, leaving only the two of them suspended in a delicate orbit of awareness. As they worked side by side on a demonstration, he noticed the ease in her movements, how she leaned just slightly toward him to show a detail, how her hand lingered briefly near his as she adjusted a book or a piece of equipment. The touches were subtle, but to him, they were profound. Each contact seemed to confirm what had been building between them for weeks, a connection that went beyond the classroom, beyond propriety, beyond words. There was a moment when she reached for a notebook that had slid toward the edge of the table. Their hands met halfway, brushing lightly. He felt a warmth surge through him, a quiet electricity that made his breath hitch ever so slightly. She looked up, her eyes soft but searching, and he realized she had felt it too. Neither spoke, yet the silence was alive with meaning, a shared acknowledgement that what they were experiencing was real, mutual, and undeniable. The room felt warmer somehow, charged with unspoken understanding. He noticed the subtle details, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the faint shimmer of her eyes in the dim light, the rhythmic cadence of her breathing that seemed to match his own. The physical closeness was no longer accidental. It was a gentle dance of mutual awareness, a delicate choreography of gestures, glances, and pauses. He wanted to speak, to say something that would define the moment, but words felt unnecessary. Instead, he reached for her hand lightly, not in a bold declaration, but in a tentative gesture of trust and care. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers brush against his, lingering just long enough to confirm the connection without overstepping the fragile line of propriety. For the first time, he felt a sense of mutual acceptance, a quiet recognition that they both desired the same closeness but were cautious, thoughtful, and aware of the complexity of their feelings. The attraction that had simmered in glances and brief touches was now acknowledged silently, fully, in the shared space between them. It was a turning point, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but intimate and deeply significant. As they finished their work and began to pack up, their hands brushed again, this time with a sense of intention and familiarity. He noticed the small, contented smile she gave him, a private acknowledgement of their unspoken bond. He felt a calm resolve settle in his chest. The tension was still there, yes, but it was no longer filled with anxiety or doubt. Instead, it carried promise, warmth, and a quiet joy in being seen and understood. Walking out of the seminar together, side by side, he felt the closeness in the slight brushing of their arms, the rhythm of their steps almost synchronized. They didn't need to rush, didn't need to speak, the connection was palpable in every shared movement. That evening marked a new phase in their relationship, not just attraction, not just tension, but a tender, mutual acceptance that allowed them to exist in each other's presence fully, openly, and honestly. The classroom was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun that slanted through the tall windows. It was the final day of the course, and most students had already left, leaving only a few lingering to gather their things. He stayed behind, his notebook clutched loosely in his hands, heart thrumming with a strange mix of anticipation and nervousness. She was gathering her materials as well, her movements calm and deliberate. But he noticed a subtle difference. She was slower, more reflective, as if savoring the last moments of this shared experience. Her eyes met his across the room, and that familiar, knowing smile appeared, carrying warmth and reassurance. It was a smile that had the power to quiet his racing thoughts, to make the world shrink down to just the two of them in this suspended moment. He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with weeks of unspoken understanding, stolen glances, and fleeting touches. "Thank you for everything," he said softly, almost whispering. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of emotion he hadn't dared to voice before. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light and something more, something tender, patient, and quietly joyful. "You don't need to thank me," she replied, her voice gentle, yet filled with the weight of unspoken feelings. "You've learned as much from this experience as I have, perhaps more." There was a pause, and in it, the room seemed to grow quieter still, the air between them thick with anticipation and understanding. He felt the pull of the moment, the undeniable tension that had been building over weeks, and he reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The contact was soft, fleeting, but intentional. Her skin felt warm beneath his fingers, her pulse steady yet quickening. She didn't pull away, instead, her hand lightly rested on his wrist, a silent acknowledgement, a gentle acceptance of the closeness they shared. Their eyes met, lingering longer than necessary, communicating everything that words could not. He saw admiration, warmth, and a subtle vulnerability that mirrored his own feelings. She gave a small, contented smile, and he felt an unexpected calm settle over him, a sense that, at last, the tension, the longing, and the uncertainty had found resolution. In that quiet, golden room, they shared a final gesture that spoke volumes, a gentle, lingering hand touch that conveyed trust, respect, and affection, a soft brush of fingers that lingered in the warmth of connection. It was a moment YouTube viewers could feel in every subtle detail, the heartbeat, the warmth of shared space, the quiet intimacy of knowing and being known. As they walked to the door together, their shoulders brushed lightly, their steps almost synchronized. Outside, the cool evening air wrapped around them, a gentle contrast to the warmth they had shared inside. She paused at the threshold, giving him a glance that held reassurance, promise, and understanding. He returned her look, feeling the weight of their shared journey and the profound impact they had made on each other's lives. This was the resolution, a bond acknowledged, fragile yet enduring, intimate yet respectful. They had crossed the invisible line of emotional connection, admitting feelings without rushing toward a label, savoring the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust and affection. Whether they would explore a relationship fully or cherish this connection in its quiet, transformative way, they left the classroom changed, carrying with them a connection that would linger long after the lights dimmed. And as he turned to walk away, he knew this lesson, the one that wasn't in the books, would stay with him forever.